In the Gospel of John, and we will pick up where we left off in the Gospel of John. We did not make it through all of John 11 last time, so we'll be picking up in the middle of John 11. It'll be verse 47, and I'll just catch you up where we're at. If you're not accustomed to a Calvary Chapel, that's what we do. Chapter by chapter, verse by verse, we're going to pick up where we left off and keep going, because that's what we do. We want you to have the whole Word of God. We try to emphasize the Word and try to minimize my words, really. And so here in John 11, first of all, know that from John 11 through the middle of John chapter 12, it takes place mostly in Bethany, which is just over the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem. All of these chapters here take place from January until April of 32 AD. It's right before the Passover and the crucifixion of Christ. So far in John 11, Jesus has gone to Bethany, to his friend's house, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, and he has raised Lazarus from the dead. And it is one of these last giant events before the cross. And we made a big point we went all through that last time we were together talking about the crucifixion, or not the crucifixion of Lazarus, but the resurrection of Lazarus. We compared it even a little bit to the resurrection of Christ. And this event has caused a large stir. It's instilled belief in some people that never believed before. In fact, we made the point to say that some of these very people that witnessed the raising of Lazarus will be the ones that are raising the palm branches here in just a few short days at the triumphal entry. And we'll actually see that today, the triumphal entry of Christ coming into Jerusalem. The challenge is really thrown back to the people. You know, who do you say that I am? They can no longer doubt it. They can no longer doubt who he is. He showed supremacy over every area of creation, from walking on water to we talked about all those different areas of creation last time. The substance of a thing, the quantity of a thing, the quality of a thing, the relation of a thing. He even brings people back from the other world, from eternity back into this world. It's undeniable who he is. And we made the point there as we completed the last time in chapter 11, verse 45 and verse 46, that there was a difference this time. Instead of some leaving and believing and some leaving in doubt, it says in verse 45 and 46 that some left in belief and others left in belief and went and told the Pharisees. There was no longer any doubting what he was doing. The question now is, will they continue to maintain this belief? Will this belief go deeper than just, we believe that you can do these things? Will you believe who he is and how that applies to your life? And so I think what it is they're being challenged to authenticity. That's the way we're going to phrase this for today. We're going to go through the next three accounts here in the scriptures, coming off of after the resurrection of Lazarus and just before he really enters Jerusalem for these last several days of being examined. Because once we get into the second half of chapter 12, it's a whole new thing. He's going to be in Jerusalem at the Passover, and I'll set this up even to get us ready for when we get into the last half of chapter 12. The Passover lamb, that's what he's going to fulfill. The Passover lamb was to be gotten on the 10th day of the month, examined for 4 days until Passover to verify that it is pure and perfect. Then that Passover lamb could be offered. That is what we're going to begin as we get into the second half of chapter 12 and on into the end of the gospel, really. And so these are the very last things before we get to that. These are some of the last things Christ is challenging them. Once he gets to the temple, he's the one being examined as the Passover lamb. He fields every question they have, and he gives all these wonderful answers. These are some of the last things that he is going to be doing and saying to them. So, three different groups of people, and they could challenge themselves on whether or not they are truly being authentic with their belief. So let's pick it up in John 11, verse 47. This is right after the raising of Lazarus. And our first point we're going to make here is, are we truly concerned about truth, or are we only concerned about self-preservation? When you come to Christ and you see him and you learn some things about him, the question then becomes, will you use it for your own benefit, Or will you use it because it's true? Now, Lord, what do you want me to do with this? This is a very real decision we have to make. And many people will come to Christ, or they'll come to church, or they'll come to a religious institution for what they can get out of it. How can this help me? How can this help preserve me? And others will say, no, this is true. God, what do you want from me? And so let's look at it here with the leaders in Jerusalem. Verse 47, we start. Therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the Sanhedrin together, and they were saying, what are we doing? For this man is doing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. This is an old man, John, the apostle, writing this, no doubt, outlived every one of his peers and all of the people he's talking about here. And here he is, whether on the island of Patmos or just before that, writing these things. And he would have gotten this insight. Maybe he got this insight from Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus, or one of them that would have even been there that day. And so here he is as an old man writing these accounts that he certainly wasn't in attendance at, but he heard of these things. And here they are concerned that the Romans, if they allow Jesus to continue, the Romans are going to cause them to lose their place and their nation. Of course, their place being the temple itself, and the nation and the control they had over it as the leading body of elders there, the 70. And so their motive is clear, isn't it? They're worried about their own loss. What are we going to lose? We need to protect ourselves, is the idea. They're not concerned of whether or not Jesus is actually the Messiah. They're concerned about whether or not people believe it. Think about that. They're not challenging themselves to say, well, what do we think? Is this really the one we've been waiting for? That is not what they're saying. They're saying, well, people are starting to believe. What should we do about that? It's like a church worried about a church down the road that's taking over the town. Rather than worrying about whether that church down the road that's taking over the town is preaching the truth or not. Do you see that subtle difference? It doesn't matter if they're taking over the town or not. It matters if they're telling the truth. That's what matters. And that is so far from their thinking right here. They're like, Jesus is taking over. What do we do? Well, number one, you should consider if they're doing good, if he's teaching the truth. And that is so far from their thinking. Wow, how sad. Don't we do that? Can we easily fall into that trap? Somebody is impinging in on us, and instead of asking whether or not they're doing a good thing, we just say, it's going to hurt me. And that's exactly where their mind is. Verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all. By the way, this is interesting. If you read this and you think that's rude, yes, it is rude. Actually, Josephus wrote that the Sadducees were known for being rude to each other. It was the way they talked. So yeah, he was being pretty abrupt, that you know nothing. Verse 50, nor do you take into account that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation not perish. So, it's sort of like this. Caiaphas sort of saw a right method, but applied to the wrong man. In the New Testament, aren't we told things like, listen, if there's sin in the camp, that's like leaven. It's going to spread, right? It's going to go out. It's going to affect. It's going to cause corruption and everything else. You got to deal with that. That's the right thing. That's the right method, but he's applying it to the wrong man. He's looking at Jesus as the source of the problem or the corruption or the sin. He's looking at Jesus as the one that needs to be removed before it's spread. And doesn't it speak to our original point that we're trying to make? Is that they've never considered, maybe this actually is the Messiah. Maybe this is the one that we're looking for. Maybe this is the truth, and we need to consider that first. But they're not willing to do that. They see this as something that's spreading that needs stopped, as if Jesus is sinful and wrong, and they've never considered the basic principles first of all. How our very action, think about it this way in your own life. You may think that the very things you're doing are good and appropriate. I've got to clamp down on this. But if your starting premise is wrong, if you start by thinking this thing is evil, I need to get rid of it, but it's not. then everything you're doing could be off. Isn't that exactly what happened to Saul before he became Paul the Apostle? He's like, I gotta kill these Christians. They're gonna spread. He had that position, by the way, to clamp down on heresies and things. He may have been right, except for the fact that the substance of what he was clamping down on was the wrong thing to clamp down on. Christ himself was true, and he had to find that out. The very thing you're trying to stop is the very thing you're seeking. The very thing that's real, that you need. Wow. Verse 51. Well, let's just continue. Now, he did not say this from, by the way, I should set up, this Caiaphas was the high priest during these days. They often bought and sold the office by this point. So his father-in-law Annas was also still around, who used to be the high priest. Caiaphas has been put in place by Rome. So he owes a certain allegiance to Rome, which really goes back to what we were reading in John chapter 10 about how we want a shepherd and not a hireling. Because even the high priest in these days was a hired hand that was there to do the bidding of Rome. And so that's who this Caiaphas is. And now verse 51, now he did not say this from himself, this idea that one should perish for the whole nation's sake. But being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. John gives us this commentary that Caiaphas unconsciously and involuntarily prophesied. This was the Lord using Caiaphas to say these very things that were true, that needed to happen. You've heard the expression, even a blind squirrel. That's kind of the idea. That even in his wrong motivations, he's going to be used of the Lord to do what will end up being God's will. John Trapp, from the 1600s, boy, they got to do a better painting than that. That's unfortunate. John Trapp, he famously said it this way: wholesome sugar may be found in even poisoned cane, and a precious stone can be found in a toad's head, and a flaming torch in a blind man's hand. Every now and again, somebody does something that is right, even though their motives were completely wrong. I actually want you to consider another example of this. I don't often do this to you, but I'm going to ask you to turn to Acts chapter 5, if you could join me there for a second. I want to read a section here in which something similar to this happens later, and they have to consider the same type of thing in Acts chapter 5. There's another example here of Israel's leaders considering an uprising and what they should do about this. And so, of course, this here in Acts 5, this is after Christ has ascended to heaven, and the church is starting to spread. Peter and James and the rest of the apostles are setting the world on fire, and they're concerned. What should we do? We got to clamp this down. Take a look here at Acts 5, starting in verse 33. I want to just read down through almost through the end of this chapter here a little bit. It says in verse 33, and when they heard this, they became furious and intended to kill them, meaning the apostles. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, respected by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin, and he gave orders to put the men outside for a short space. That was the apostles. And he said to them, to the rest of the council, men of Israel, take care what you purpose to do to these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up, claiming to be something, and a group of about 400 men joined up with him. But he was killed, and all who were following him were dispersed, and it came to nothing. And then in verse 37, this man named Judas the Galilean, he rose up in the days of the census. That's, of course, when Christ was born, you might remember. And he drew away people after himself. He too perished, and all those who were following him were scattered. So in this present case, I also say to you, stay away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or action is of men, it will be overthrown. But if it's of God, you're not going to be able to overthrow them. Or you may even be found fighting against God. One more verse. So they followed his advice, and after calling the apostles in and beating them, they commanded them not to speak in the name of Jesus and then released him. So it's interesting. It happens here again. And this counsel from Gamaliel is very, very similar in the sense that it's different advice. Don't kill them. Let them go. But what's interesting here is that if they're interested in self-preservation, kill them. If you're interested in truth, let them go and see if God is in it. See, Caiaphas, and go back to the account where we're reading today here in John 11, Caiaphas isn't concerned with whether or not it's truth. So he's like, we got to stop it. He's already made the determination. Christ is not real. He's not true. He's not the Messiah. We need to cut it off. Gamaliel is interested in truth in Acts 5. And he's saying, listen, even if at best we can't determine if these apostles are true, let it go and then we'll find out. That's exactly what our Pastor Chuck Smith always modeled for us as well. If somebody... There's been 2 or 3 times within Calvary Chapel's history that somebody's risen up and taken on a new flavor. Or the whole Vineyard movement came out of Calvary Chapel originally, and Chuck just said, look, if that's what you want to do, then go do it. But take the name Calvary Chapel down, take a new sign, and go do what you think the Lord wants you to do. If it's of God, it'll work. If it's not, it'll collapse. And we're not overly concerned with somebody else's ministry. Gamaliel was interested in truth. Let it go and see what the Lord might do in it. And sure enough, the church grows and thrives because obviously the Lord is in it. Now, this is the punchline I wanted to get to with all of this before we continue. The very thing that they're worried about, that there's going to be this uprising, that there's going to be a challenge to the Jewish authorities and that Rome's going to have to get involved, it literally happens 33 years later. It's going to happen. The war will begin in 66 AD. It's called the Jewish War against the Romans. It will begin. Of course, we know that culminates in 70 AD with the Romans and Titus burning down the temple and destroying everything, gradually kicking them out of the land. And it all began with a zealot named Eleazar ben Simon. I had to write it down. I didn't know his name before. He began the revolt in Jerusalem, and then John the Gerashol rose up in Galilee at the same time as Simon ben Goria. Those 3 men in different areas of the land. And all of a sudden, they can't stop it. This revolution is happening. There were just too many flames, too many fires to try to put out, and the Sanhedrin couldn't do anything about it. They tried to put people to death, and it was just too late, and the war continued to flame and rise until the Romans got involved. This very thing that they're worried about happened. In fact, as the war spread, the Romans conquered and dispersed the Jews, and that was the very hand of God. That's exactly what God wanted to happen to them. He wanted that to happen. So Gamaliel's counsel there in Acts chapter 5 to let it go and see whether or not God was in it was the wise counsel. That is exactly what they should have done, even here with Caiaphas. They should have said, listen, if this is God's will, let it go and see what happens. Caiaphas is so stuck with this presupposition that Jesus was evil and that he had to correct it, that his counsel to remove him, the only problem was he was stuck with the wrong presupposition that Jesus was evil. His counsel ends up being wrong then because he applied it to the wrong thing. Is that making sense what we're trying to get at? If something indeed is evil, yes, the scripture commands us to get rid of it. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, it talks about the young man that's having inappropriate relationships with his stepmother. Get rid of it. Send them out of the church, and so that they can learn that is sin and that is harm, and we can't allow that to spread. And when something is evil, we do this. We put it out, and we call it out so that people know that cannot continue. But if it's something of God, who are we to determine if somebody else down the road is serving the Lord or not, and if it's not in the scriptures, just because of their method, right? So let's follow the Lord, let's listen to him, and let the Lord take care of whoever's down the road. Now, if they're preaching something that's wrong and heresy, then we can recognize that, and we can talk about that. But here Caiaphas was so stuck on his own self-preservation, he didn't care about the truth. Well, let's go to verse 53. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. Verse 54, therefore Jesus no longer continued to walk openly among the Jews, but he went away from there to the region near the wilderness into a city called Ephraim. And there he stayed with his disciples. So previous to this, they informally wanted to kill him multiple times. They'd try to stone him and throw him off of cliffs and different things. And now this is an edict of the government to have him killed. And so for these last few months, or maybe it's just a few weeks, he will not be back in Jerusalem until that final Passover that's coming up very, very shortly here. It seems to be just a few weeks. He goes to this little town of Ephraim. This is not Ephraim up in the north in Galilee. This seems to just be a very small village that was near Bethel in the middle of the country, not the whole way up in Galilee. But what an interesting time that would have been. I think of all these interesting little pockets of time, that he goes there and he was having Ephraim means fruitful. I could just imagine the Lord having a fruitful time there with his disciples in these last few days, thinking of his pending, the cross and his pending work, his death, his resurrection. And here he is having this fruitful time outside of Jerusalem. So it's no longer just a few Jews here and there, but it's everybody trying to kill him. And so he just stays away until the time appointed that it's going to happen. Verse 55. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem from the region before the Passover to purify themselves. And so they were seeking Jesus and were saying one to another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think?" You could just imagine them whispering, "What do you think? Do you think he's going to come to the feast at all?" And in verse 57, now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was to report it so that they might seize him. So this is an official edict that's finally gone out. It's not that Jesus is hiding. He's intentionally planning to fulfill the scriptures, is what he's doing, to be slain on the Passover. And so this purification, there was many of these rituals in the Old Testament law in which they would have some of these purifications you needed to be purified 2 days or 3 days or even a week before an event. And so they had these baths, or they called them mikvahs, in which they would cleanse themselves. And so many people would be gathering for the entire week before Passover. And if you go there today at the southern steps in Jerusalem, even at the base of that, I think there's almost 50 different mikvahs they've already uncovered in the dirt. And many people, that is exactly where they'd gather. They'd purify themselves there. And so there's just this large gathering that's already happening in Jerusalem. The idea is there's large anticipation. And now specifically the talk for the whole week leading up to it is, do you think he'll show up? Well, of course he will. And we'll see that. We'll see that he's going to show up. And so the challenge, why do you want him to show up? Is it because you really want to know the truth? Or are they just looking for some activity so they could go home? I mean, many of these would have come from Galilee or all over the place. Are they just looking to go home with a fascinating story of what happened at this year's Passover? Or do they want him to show up because they want to hear from him and they want to hear the truth? I dare say there's still people that go to church just to get the gossip. Just to get the gossip and go home. Did you see? I finally found out what she's been up to, or whatever, I wonder what their motivation really was. Now, maybe some of them were very, very pure. But I really believe in this last section of chapter 11, that this question of, are you in it for yourself, or are you in it to really know the truth, really comes out here. And now let's transition to chapter 12. We're going to do the first two accounts here in chapter 12. The first one is there in Bethany, where not Larry, his name was Lazarus. Lazarus, Mary, or if you put Lazarus and Mary together, it's probably Larry's house. Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, they're there in Bethany, and that's where this next account takes place. And now this next question of authenticity comes up, which is this: are you truly a worshiper, or do you see worship as a waste? We're going to see this confrontation between Mary and Judas. The one at this point, most of them still think that he's pure as the driven snow, and they will soon find out that is not the case. But it's this inner challenge of the character: is worship a waste, or is it true worship to you? And that's a real question to challenge ourselves with. we just had an opportunity to worship in song a moment ago, and I remember the years, the time where I had a drug problem. I was drugged to church, and I every time I sat through those worship services, there was no worship coming out of me. I was told to be there. There I am. People are singing. I look over at the weird people actually worshiping because they're not weird, and I was the one that was weird. I looked at it as like, what are they doing? Why are they acting like that? Because I had no idea. We're going to see that conflict right here. Chapter 12, verse 1. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. We just looked at that back in chapter 11. By the way, this is an interesting timing. 6 days before the Passover. This puts this just before the previous Sabbath. So here he is coming to this house, and what they're doing is they're preparing this giant feast, and then they're going to roll right into the very last Sabbath day that Jesus would have on earth before his resurrection. That's interesting timing. So verse 2, so they made him a supper there in Bethany, and Martha was serving, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Man, this would be absolutely fascinating. This is also discussed by Matthew in chapter 26 of his gospel and Mark 14. And so we know that this is actually at Simon the leper's house in Bethany. It's not at Lazarus and Mary and Martha's house at all. It's at another house there in Bethany. 6 days before the Passover. And this meal is the meal itself will end up being 2 days before the Passover. We also get that from Matthew and Mark. And so the 6 days before is when he would have come there to Bethany. He spends this last week almost there with his friends, very, very close to Jerusalem. Interesting that it's at Simon the leper's house. I mean, I think the right way to say that, similar to like John 9, we always call the guy in John 9 the blind man. Well, he wasn't blind after Jesus encountered him, right? Same with this guy, Simon the leper. The meal is at Simon the leper's house, which means he was healed. This Simon the leper he encountered Christ. He was healed of his leprosy. He went to the priest and said, I'm healed. And the priest was shocked and said, I don't know why you're here. Well, because Jesus told me there was something in Leviticus I was supposed to do. Right, that's right. Sure, I'll be right back. Let me go talk to my priest friend. And then he had to figure out what in the world he's talking about. And so this Simon is a healed man. And that's where they're going. I'm picturing the people at this meal. You got Simon the leper, who's been able to go home again after who knows how long. Somebody that's been so intimately touched by Christ, life completely radically changed. You've got a resurrected man reclining at the meal with Mary and Martha, his sisters. You've got the 12 disciples there, including Judas. I mean, what a group of people to be. Could you imagine being at this meal, right? Like, I'm picturing Lazarus. Like, did he have like maybe he had like, did he still have his like moles and things, or like did he get like fresh skin? 4 days dead, right? I won't go into the details, but you have problems after 4 days dead, okay? I don't think you have eyeballs left after 4 days. Let's just leave it at that. Did he, like, was his skin, like, all cleared up? Or, like, did he just give him back the exact original flesh? We don't know how that worked. But here he is reclining at this meal. And this is likely a celebration for Lazarus there at his friend, Simon the leper's house. And just how awesome that Jesus wasn't consumed at this point with his own grief or with his own steps ahead. But here he is celebrating at this meal with these folks, probably celebrating Lazarus. And he's not consumed, even at this moment. He's not consumed with himself so much that he can't focus on these other people. And he's still in this posture of giving, willing to give and help to someone else, even then. I am fascinated with Wayne and Wayne's ability. He's been in and out of the hospital with so many things lately, with his heart. And I'm fascinated with his ability to continually talk to nurses and doctors all the time about the Lord. Like, in the midst of all of his horrible grief, that he could be, you get the ingrown eyeballs, right? Like, woe is me. And when you can continue to see outward and see, Lord, how can I serve while I'm here? I'm fascinated by that. And that's exactly the way a believer should be thinking. And certainly our Lord did that as well. And so here they are inclining at this meal. I want to back, we don't have time, but I want to go back and I want to look at the previous stories of Mary and Martha serving and Mary worshiping. And Martha was all worried, that Mary wasn't serving. She was only worshiping in that previous encounter. And you just picture at this point in their relationship with the Lord, they know they've been through the resurrection of their brother. They were both, we saw that last chapter, they were both on the same page. They said the exact same words to the Lord when their brother was dead. Lord, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. And they both come to this place where they're so infatuated now with the Lord. You just got to picture Martha in her serving now. She's no longer looking at Mary thinking, get her up and have her help me. She's now enjoying the service. You look at, we'll see Mary in just a second, and as if she wasn't already a worshiper, you'll see her enjoying her worship. The relationship is so much deeper than it ever was for all of them. And Lazarus, as if you didn't know this, as tradition goes on, we don't have the scriptures, but as tradition says, Lazarus went on to become the leader of the church in Cyprus, on the island of Cyprus. And so he certainly endured for a while. I tell you what, one of the questions, when I see Lazarus in eternity, the first thing I'm going to ask him is, do you have memory from those 4 days, or did the Lord just wipe your memory from those 4 days? Would that not be the hardest thing to want to come back after 4 days? I was just talking to King David. What am I doing here? I don't want to be here. I want to be there. That would have been hard. I just imagine the Lord wiped his memory, that he has had no recollection of those 4 days dead. But that's just a guess. Verse 3, let's keep going. Mary then took a liter of perfume, a very costly spikenard or pure nard. The word just means a genuine nard. It's what's the word for filtered? You get the idea. It's genuine. It's not mixed with other things. It's genuine nard. And she anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. This is old man John writing this. And one of the things he writes here is he remembers the house was filled with this. Somebody in this room is still remembering Grandma's pie. Going to Grandma's house, and the smell was one of the first things you remember, right? Like, here's John. Maybe he's on the island even writing this, and he's thinking, man, I remember that day. And I remember the flavor of the whole day based on the smell of it all. Now, the other gospel accounts actually indicate that Mary had first anointed his head and then worked down to his feet. And it's an interesting picture because it shows the anointing of a king, or the priest, anointing over the head and then even down to the feet, in that idea of absolute humility and service to the king, to the priest. And so pure worship as she starts to wipe his feet with her hair. Now, be careful to recognize this is different than the woman of Luke 7 that also comes and anoints Jesus' feet. That woman was a different woman altogether in a different place. It was up in Galilee, just completely different scenario. So don't mix the two together. This is Mary of Bethany. This is Lazarus and Martha's sister Mary. And so we'll get into the cost of this in the very next verse. So let me continue here into verse 4, and we'll start to extrapolate this a little more. Verse 4, but Judas Iscariot, from that place, it's not his last name, it's where he's from, one of his disciples, who was going to betray him, said, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief, and he had the money box he used to take from what was put into it. Again, this is John in retrospect, looking back, knowing that Judas was the liar. He was the scoundrel and the thief. They didn't know that at the time. Remember, even at the Last Supper, Christ says, listen, one of you is going to betray me. And they all start looking at each other like, who is it? Like Judas didn't have horns, right? They did not know that he was the one that was doing this. And so John, in retrospect, all those years later, knows Judas was the one that's going to betray. But look at the cost of this spikenard, this ointment. It says it was 300 denarii. Denarii was the equivalent of a day's wage. So this is virtually a year's salary. I mean, what, $50,000, $60,000 or whatever, you know? That is a number. And that is what she gets out to pour out on him. Think about things today that cost $50,000 or $60,000, and then one fell swoop, you just give it, completely given, and that's the example of what she did here. This is like a last great act, and what a contrast between Judas and Mary, right? Judas saw this whole thing as misplaced. What a waste, he would say. What a waste. And yet it was worship. It was true worship, and it was worth it. That's what the word worship means. Worth-ship. That it's worth it. That's what it means. So you come to something like this in your life, and you will, and you have. And you will say, what a waste. Or you'll say, that's true worship. Right? People do that to the Christian all the time. They look at us giving our Sunday morning, or they look at us giving our time or our monies or our efforts to the Lord and to his church. And so many of them say, what a waste. Right? And yet I do that every time I see somebody getting drunk and trying to wake up the next morning. And I say, what a waste. We're all going to pour ourselves into something. The question is, what are you going to pour yourself into, and is he worth it? Is it worth it, whatever you pour yourself into? The item is the same item. It's Christ. And the question is he worth it? Or is it a waste? Now, of course, Judas comes up with the perfect religious response, though, doesn't he? I'm not saying this because I need the money. I'm saying this because there's many poor people out there that needed this. I think I just heard this by a televangelist last week. Right? Like, they still do this. They do surveys. You know this. They do surveys to find out, well, in this part of the country, if you put up pictures of people in wheelchairs, then people send more. But if you put up people with cancer, they'll give less. So they know these things. They do this research. And so they say, well, we don't need your money. We just want to help collect your money so that we can get it to the poor people that really need it. What a perfect religious answer he comes up with. And John knows in retrospect. Now, he was doing this because he was a thief. He was doing this because he was putting his own hand into the bag. He wasn't doing this for the poor people. He was doing it for poor Judas. Poor Judas, I need the money. Mary did what was sacrificial and was worship. And this is it. You're either a giver or you're a taker. Judas was a thief. Always willing to think of himself. He was a liar. It wasn't for the poor. And yet Mary here is willing to give, even at great cost. And she's willing to let others think her a fool, to give her worship to the Lord. Do you think Mary cared at this point what anybody in that room thought? Not a chance. Not a chance. I submit to you, we will all give our worship to something. What are you giving it to? We will all spend on something or someone. What do you want to give it to? Verse 7. Let's continue. Verse 7. So here's Christ's response. Therefore Jesus said, let her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. Giving to the poor is endless. Now that should mean two things. It should mean there is a time where the Lord's going to want each one of us to give to the poor. But it also means you can't fix the problem. It is an endless well. If you want to know that that's true, run a church or become a church secretary. You will get a phone call about every other day from somebody, even in the smallest of churches, that says, I need your help. And you have to figure out quickly how to navigate that and how the Lord would want you to give. And you can ask us all about that later. We've got standards for how we give and when we don't give. The poor you always have. In fact, even in the book of Revelation, it speaks even there in the very end about all those great and small, rich and poor stood before the Lord. Even in the end, there will still be every case scenario will still be there in the end. So as the Lord leads, we help and we take care, knowing that we cannot end that situation. But giving to Christ is special, and he says that here. You always have the poor, but you don't always have me. Mary recognized something that Judas certainly didn't recognize, that his time was short. What has he been trying to get his disciples to realize all these years? I'm going to go to the cross. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. He said it in so many spiritual ways to try to get them to realize it, and they just look at each other like, what is he trying to say? And I think she got it. What is one of the things that didn't happen at Christ, for Christ after he died on the cross? Remember, the ladies went to the tomb to do what? After he died, they were coming on Sunday morning for what? To anoint his body for the burial. And they didn't get to do it because he already raised from the dead. And what's he say right here? Let her alone. She's done this for my burial. Mary recognized something that the disciples didn't even recognize. This is it. He's going to the cross. She knew it. And she's anointing him even now for that day and for that moment that's coming very much soon. She knew it. And even his disciples didn't get it. This was his burial anointing right here. And he acknowledged that very, very plainly and clearly. The window is short. There's only a small window of time. And Mary took it. She didn't want to miss it. She took her opportunity. The idea, though, here's one more part of how Christ means this. Let her alone. She's done this for the day of my burial. Would you ever, if you had a family member that died and somebody wanted to give them a burial and they wanted to up it a notch and say, no, I want to do something better for my mom that just passed away, would you look at them and be like, oh, you can't do that. You should give that money to the poor. Yeah, you'd be like, well, this is it. This is the last opportunity. So let them, right? And that's sort of the same idea. He's saying that to them. She recognizes this is it. This is the last opportunity to give to Christ, and she took advantage. You can't complain about that. Verse 9. Then the large crowd from the Jews learned that he was there, and they came, not because of Jesus only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing on Jesus. You just want to strangle them, right? They don't care whether or not any of this is true or not. They see Lazarus as a threat to their authority. Never mind the fact that, well, wait a second, we should examine how this guy was raised from the dead, or if it really happened. No, there's no contemplation of that. By the way, Pharisees ran much of the synagogues. They were also in the Sanhedrin, but it was the Sadducees that were the leaders in the Sanhedrin. It was always a Sadducee that was the chief priest or the high priest. The Sadducees, one of their different beliefs were they did not believe in the resurrection. That's why they were Sadducee. If you've never heard that one. So a resurrected Lazarus would be a problem for their whole doctrine, for all their beliefs. They didn't believe in anything spiritual, let alone resurrection. And so here we have Lazarus raised from the dead. Yeah, that would cause a little fly in the ointment, so to say. And so they're plotting to kill him. Picture this. I don't care whether or not it really happened. I don't care how it happened. I just want him dead. What? Whoa, if we ever get to that place where we're like, I don't care if it's good or bad. I just want it stopped. What? Examine the root of a thing. Find out, is it of the Lord or not? Is it true? This is what matters, right? Examine the evidence. That would be a huge embarrassment to these Pharisees. Wouldn't anyone just rejoice in life from the dead, you'd think? But nope, not these chief priests. They are held back from enjoying the joy because of the pride of their position. I want to say that again. They are held back from enjoying what's happening in the Lord because they're so stuck on maintaining what they think they have. Wow. And let me say it the opposite. I want to be willing to change. I want to be willing to adjust. I want to follow the Lord wherever he leads. If he leads me to something different, it'll never be different than what he's revealed in his word, but I want to be ready. Let's go to the next and final point here. We have, starting in verse 12, now the triumphal entry, that Sunday before the Passover, which would come up on the Thursday. And here Christ is going to come into Jerusalem for that final 4 days to be examined. And John gives us probably the shortest encounter for the triumphal entry, the shortest amount of verses on this. You can read extensively on the triumphal entry in some of the other Gospels, and we tried to just keep it in balance with whichever Gospel we're reading at this time. So we're not going to go over the entire events of the triumphal entry, but we're certainly going to touch on it here. And I want to challenge ourselves with it in the Gospel of John from this perspective, which is our devotion just skin deep, or can we persevere through difficulties? We've already mentioned that so many of these people that are going to be the first ones to wave the palm branches on this Palm Sunday, they're the ones that saw Lazarus raised from the dead. We saw that early in chapter 11. So many of these people are the same ones that in just 4 days are going to be saying, crucify him, crucify him. Some of the same people. And so we don't know which people are which, but we know that some of these very people are going to be the ones chanting, crucify me, crucify him. So challenge ourselves to say, how deep is our belief? Or are we willing to take it to its logical conclusion, or only to the point where as long as it doesn't hurt me, as long as it's not going to get in my way, I'll follow Christ? So take a look here at the triumphal entry starting in verse 12. It says, on the next day, so this is now the Sunday, triumphal entry day, the large crowd who had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took branches of palms and they went out to meet him and began to shout, Hosanna. Or I met a Israeli friend, Alfred Israeli was his name. He said, you Americans, you say Hosanna. He said, it's Hosanna. So I just can't do that every time. It'll wake somebody up. I can't do that. But it's Hosanna. Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. The palms, of course, they represent victory and peace, and even the Romans would use them. They represented this for everyone. And they're chanting. We're going to go there, actually. If you want to turn to Psalm 118 for just a second, I want to read a little bit of the context of where the people get this chant from in Psalm 118. This is why they're saying it, because of what is written in prophecy. They're intentionally trying to say, this is the Messiah that's long been prophesied. They're chanting this quote from Psalm 118. I wonder how much of this Psalm 118 they actually believed. Let me just read a little bit of it here. Psalm 118, I'll start in verse 21. Look at all the allusions to Christ right here. Verse 21, I shall give thanks to you, for you have answered me, and you have become my salvation. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Of course, that's exactly what Christ has come to do. He even applied that to himself. Verse 23, this is from Yahweh. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day which Yahweh has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And you might remember from, I think it's Luke 19, Christ at the triumphal entry, he looked over Jerusalem and he said, Jerusalem, the city that stones the prophets and kills those that are sent unto you. I would have gathered you as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you would not let me. You didn't know this thy day, the things that belong to your peace, and now they'll be hid from you. The very day prophesied by Daniel chapter 9. Daniel's prophecy of 173,880 days from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah would come on this very day. It was prophesied. And like we can't know the second coming, they were supposed to know the first coming. And they didn't. And here it is. It says in verse 24, this is the day. We sing that song, this is the day. Though it was that day. That's the day The very day he came at the triumphal entry was the day that was prophesied. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Let me read a few more verses. Verse 25 says, this is still in Psalm 118, verse 25. O Yahweh, save. That's translated Hosanna. O Yahweh, succeed. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Of course, this is what they've been saying. We have blessed you from the house of Yahweh. Yahweh is God, and he has given us light. And then watch this. The very next verse. Bind the festival sacrifice with cords to the horns of the altar. You are my God, and I give thanks to you. You are my God. I exult in you. Did they know that? Did they know as they're chanting, save now, save us now? Did they know how he was going to do it? That he was going to do it by being bound to the altar. I wonder. How many of them were just thinking, save us from Rome? And how many of them realized, I needed saved from my sin? I need change from within. That's what I need. And so come back here to John 12. How deep did they go? What were they really thinking? Verse 14, we continue. And Jesus, finding a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written. And now he's going to quote from, I think it's Zechariah 9. As it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king comes, seated on a donkey's colt. Verse 16. These things his disciples did not understand at the first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him, and that they had done these things unto him. And so Zechariah 9, verse 9, adds that the Messiah was just and lowly, having salvation. Even just another indicator there in the prophecy that he wasn't coming as the conquering king at this first coming. He was coming just and lowly, having salvation by being bound to the altar. In the moment, these people, they're just doing what is right or what's needed. Even his disciples, go get the donkey. He told me to go get the donkey. Okay, let's go get the donkey. They're bringing it back. They have no idea they're fulfilling scriptures. And then after reflection and time, they're like, wait a second. He had us do that to fulfill Zechariah chapter 9. Have you ever had, I hope you've had this, have you ever had a conversation with somebody or somebody comes up to you later and they say, hey, that thing you said about the Lord the other day, that really moved me. That really hit the right spot. I needed to hear that. And half the time we're like, oh, I don't even remember what I said, because the Lord just used you. The Lord, you just said what the next thing was you knew the Lord had put in your heart and just seemed to apply, and you said it, and it was the Lord using you. And I that's the same thing happening to these guys. And afterwards they're like, he let us fulfill Zechariah 9. What? That's awesome. We're in the Bible now. No, you're really in the Bible now. They thought they were in the Bible from fulfilling Zechariah 9, but now they're all over the New Testament. Wow. It could just become so natural to obey the Lord that you don't even realize that you're serving the Lord and you're doing what he wants you to do. Sometimes the service to the king isn't these giant things that you're going to remember the rest of your life, but it's just making an impact on somebody. It's just saying the truth to somebody. It's using the word for something. It's just serving. In whatever way the Lord's called you to serve the Lord. Let's finish this here in verse 17. So the crowd who was with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness about him. For this reason also the crowd went and met him, because they heard that he had done this sign. So the Pharisees said one to another, you see that you are gaining nothing. Look, the world has gone after him, and they are concerned. Now I want to point out that there are three different reactions here. First of all, in verse 17, there are believers that are witnessing for Jesus. It says there, they not only saw Lazarus raised from the dead, they believe Jesus is the one, and it says at the end of verse 17, they continued to bear witness about him. That means to say the word. This is what I saw. This is what he did. By the way, that's how easy it is to start evangelizing. Just say, this is what I saw. This is what he did to me. I read it. I believed it. And then this happened. Just say what happened to you. And that's where witnessing begins. And so that group is there in verse 17. But then there in verse 18, it says, for this reason also the crowd went and met him. Now you've got inquirers. You got people that are interested, people that are looking into this. That's exactly what we should be trying to stir up, is people to come and see. And that's exactly how some of the early disciples gained other disciples to Christ. They just said, just come and see. Do that for people to know God now. Just tell them, come and see. Read the word for yourself and see it for yourself. But finally, in verse 19, there's a third group there, which is the haters. And the haters continued to grow in frustration. The word is supposed to have that effect. When you live for God, don't be surprised when you see all three of these reactions. Don't let that surprise you. But they said mean words about me. Well, that's going to happen from time to time. It should draw other people. It should cause ones that already know Christ to continue to bear witness. All of these things should happen as we're sharing the Lord. So don't worry if you see each of these three types of groups happening and being stirred up because of what you say. Don't worry about it. That's what the word's going to do. It's designed to do that. All right, well, we're going to stop there for today. I believe the Lord would have us to finish John chapter 12 the next time we're together. And so, in a sense, today we're right in between two major things. We just saw this raising of Lazarus. Next time we get together, now we go into this whole new time period, this 4 days in the temple in which Christ is getting examined. And I just thought that this was fascinating here. This middle, was this a couple of weeks? Was this a couple of days of what we covered today? It's a little unclear, but it's weeks or days. And all of it is a challenge to people saying, or what do you really think about this? Why are you really doing what you're doing? You look at these Pharisees there, and point number one, they're just interested in their own self-preservation. They could care less about what is true. It was only about how can I continue to endure in this world. How sad. How sad. They didn't care about the truth at all. Didn't even come into their equation. And so that's step one. Care about the truth. When somebody raises something about Christ, the first thing in our mind should be, is it true? It shouldn't be, oh, well, it came from that person, so it can't be true. But we do that sometimes, right? Well, I heard it from them, so it surely can't be true. I even do that when I'm talking to cults. I'm talking to Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Muslims and everything else. If they say something that is true, acknowledge it. It's a good way to build some rapport, so that you can launch into a healthy conversation if they actually say something that's true. They actually do from time to time. Say something that's true, acknowledge it. We care about the truth, and if they say something true, acknowledge it. And let's bridge the gap based on what is true. And then number two, we looked at Mary and I almost said Lazarus, Mary and Judas, and this example of pouring your life into something. Once you've found something that's true, you pour your life into it. And she did. And don't be shocked if somebody thinks it's a waste. We all pour our lives into what we think is worth it. We do. We will. You will. You are. And so make it something that is of substance, something that actually matters. And then the final challenge there today with the triumphal entry is, how many of these people that were there saying Hosanna will turn away in a couple of days because they get nervous that their leader is going to be crucified? How many turn away? And I guarantee there was some. We don't know how many in this particular crowd, but we know some did. And so that's a real challenge to say, would we continue to believe in the truth even if it costs us something? Even if it's a challenge to our own personal comfort? Because God is a little less concerned about our comfort, a little more concerned about our character and building that character of authenticity within us. And so I think we can endure and persevere because he's worth it. And I hope you found him to be worth it. You won't do any of these things unless you've found him to be worth it. And so learn the word and come to know him. My wife constantly reminds me that when we read the word, we're not reading the word to know about him. We're learning the word to know him. I just removed one little word there, and it makes a big difference. We're learning about him, about a person. And so the more you know him, the more you fall in love with him, the more it will be worth it, and you'll do it. You'll live for him. Amen.